Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We are all live, depends on where you're tuning in from. And today's conversation is very special and unique for me. I'm really excited about it. And I have to admit, slightly nervous because the quality of my guest is incredible and what he does is just exceptional. Robin Dreeke is an expert in behavioral science, author and coach, and his entire credibility and experience was built as an FBI agent and head of FBI behavioral analysis program. So first and foremost, Robin, thank you very much for being generous with your time and sharing it with me and my audience.
Oh, my pleasure, Ralph. And thanks for having me on. And it's funny, our little chat before started, you, you got this stuff down too. So hopefully I can add a little bit more at least.
I'm always learning. And as I was reading your book continuously, I was like, wow, this is incredible. And one of the questions that I ask myself is, why such a critical skill as building rapport with others and trust? It's not thought at all. Then you become a manager and it's expected of you to do it. And you've been given this tool that is formal authority. And it's really difficult to build that report. It's really difficult to make it all about others because from the get-go, as a managers, we are set to use that tool. Here's the authority, use it, it will give you the results. But that's not how you get the best results from people, right?
Never. I am, so one of my values as well, we were talking about values beforehand too, is continuously learn, continually pass on information. And that's what coaches do. And that's what we all do. And I think it's our obligation. And, part of, I'm a big reader of Simon Sinek's as well. I've just finished up Leaders Eat Last, and he reiterates again what is my great mantra in life. And that is everything in life comes down to being able to create great trust, great relationships, great partnerships, and create a circle of trust inside of organizations. One of my big sayings all the time is people don't care about your title and position. They just care about how you treat them. The greatest, healthiest organizations and companies and groups in the world have the ability to form those great, healthy bonds and relationships of trust, free from manipulation, free from subterfuge or deception or control of others. If a leader is relying upon their authority to get things done, then that I guarantee you that organization eventually is doomed.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Simon Sinek as well. In fact, Leaders Eat Last is the book that I like the most, despite that the why is probably the one that is most recognized and quoted. Yes, I was blown away with it. And I was like, that's the type of leader that I'd like to be, and I'm going to work towards it. And it's easier said than done, actually. But luckily, I can now learn from you. Where do we start actually? So imagine I'm this manager who really wants to build a rapport with people and build that trust, but I don't have that mentor around me. Nobody told me how to do it. Where do I start? What would be my first point of reference to start building those skills and becoming that trustworthy leader?
So to me, it really came down to understanding the language we need to use in order to shift the focus from ourselves onto others. I mean, many, many years ago, well, for one thing is I am not a natural born leader, natural born, really self-centered, hard charging type A. I went to the Naval Academy. From the Naval Academy, I went to the Marine Corps, from the Marine Corps in the FBI. I mean, that background really screams at you. You'd think he's a great natural leader. No, great natural hard charger, too intense. I remember my first rating and review I had in the Marine Corps, I was ranked last. The Marines are great at evaluating people, and there was 14 other second lieutenants, and I was dead last out of all 14. I remember going up to my major, my reviewing officer, and saying to him, as I had only one skill at the time, and that was I owned it. Like Jocko Willink says in Extreme Ownership, I owned it. If something went sideways, I took accountability for my actions, and I went to my major and said, all right, I know I'm doing something wrong. What is it? And he goes, well, you just need to be a better leader. I was like, all right, be like. How do I be like that? And he goes, well, you just need to make it about everyone else but yourself, because leaders are selfless servants of others. I was like, all right, I thought I was. How exactly do I do that? And he goes, I don't know, figure it out. Just do it. So the gauntlet was laid down. How do you actually shift from the focus of yourself to others? And so the first thing you can do is start building in your language these 4 things. These are my go-to 4 things in everything you say, everything you do, in writing, on a Zoom call, in an email. And that is, seek the thoughts and opinions of others rather than giving them yours. 2, talk in terms of their priorities instead of yours. In other words, human beings were genetically and biologically coded to want to act in our own best interest in terms of our safety, security, prosperity, and a sense of control. So if you discover what their priorities are in terms of those things, talk in terms of those. 3, and this is, you mentioned this before too, is be non-judgmentally curious, non-judgmental validation of others. This is where you have empathy to seek to understand other people from their point of view without judging them. And finally, give them choices. When you empower people with choices, you're demonstrating that you value them and you're willing to affiliate with them. So if you include one of those 4 things in everything you say and do, their oxytocin, their long-term, relationship building pleasure centers in the brain are firing because you're now demonstrating that you are good for them. You're good for their survival. And this is what great leaders do. So my 3 leadership pillars are very simple. Leaders understand goals, objectives, and priorities and accomplish them. The second is they create a safe environment mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And third, they're a resource for the success of others with no expectation of reciprocity. So you do those 4 things, you have those as your 3 pillars, and you start enacting those things. And as you said beforehand too, with transparency and openness, there you go. Life's easy.
This is as you were saying, those 4 things to do and say, whether it's a Zoom call, email, and conversation, 2 jumped out to me immediately when I would take your rules into a feedback world. And that's number 2. The priority is theirs, not yours. Find their priorities and their needs rather than yours, and give them the choices.
Right.
One of my experiences when managers are sharing feedback and the way we've been trained and we role modeling it and copying others, if you really listen to that feedback, to what the message is, it says, this company needs you as an employee to do what the manager wants you to do as well. And there is no that person need, because that person need may not be a loyalty with that company or staying with his field, or, in the future, I want to be someone else. And so for me, it's not intrinsically driven. It's very professional. Like, this is what you expect to do because we're paying you to do so.
Right.
But if you discover what's important to them and change the feedback around and link it to their needs, i.e., Raf, you've mentioned you want to be a public speaker in the future. So when you do the next presentation with our exec teams, here's your opportunity to practice certain skill sets. All of a sudden, you're talking about my priorities, my dreams for the future. Is that the type of looking for priorities we are talking about? Is that
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things you can also do to start improving all your relationships, as a coach or as a leader or anything is, just as a coworker, discover the jobs of everyone around you and figure out what you're going to do to make them easier. An exercise I love to give folks is, all right, pretend you are actually your boss. From their perspective, not what you think. From your boss's perspective, write your review. Write down your top 3 strengths, and now also write down what they think you could be doing better. And then ask yourself, all right, so what are you going to do about it? So from your boss's perspective, here's what you are not good at. And what you're not good at is basically the areas that you're not serving the priorities of the boss. What are you going to do about it? Because that's exactly why you might be falling short in certain areas, because understanding the context and perspective of someone else and how they see you from their perspective, it really comes down to very simple things. You need to provide resources in terms of the priorities of others in order to be successful, in order to move forward and understand how the world sees you from their point of view.
But my guess here is there's something that you talk about in your book, and you call it ego suspension.
Yes.
I'm guessing in that exercise, this particular technique that you've mentioned, and I love the story that you shared over there, is really needed, because as I mentioned right at the beginning, as a managers, we've been given this job title, and with that, it comes that ego. I'm the superior here, right? And it's really difficult to accept that responsibility, that extreme ownership, as you mentioned, as Jack Wilcox says. So how do we practice that ego suspension? How do we bring it into that exercise to get better at it? Because I believe that's one of the major barrier here.
It's probably the greatest challenge, there's no doubt, of every human being. And it's easy to read in others first. Matter of fact, most of the time when I'm working with clients and people, one of the first things I'll try to figure out is exactly, because this is the key to understanding how how ego comes into play is how insecure someone is, because the more insecure you are, the more your ego's in play. If someone says that, someone slighted me, someone was doing all these things to me, basically insecurity comes from a victim mentality. Instead of just understanding that no one is doing anything to you, you just happen to be in a way of someone else's insecurity. So I live by the mantra of, I do not allow myself to be collateral damage in anyone else's insecurities. I listen to the content they're delivering, but the delivery that they might have is just caused from whatever insecurity that they might have. And then I take ownership of it again. It's like, what behavior am I actually doing that might be flaring up with one of their insecurities? So that's part of it. This is part of how to get over your ego and vanity, is realizing people are not doing everything to you. They're just being who they are. So accept that and listen to the content, see if it's valuable or not. The other thing too is just be non-judgmentally curious. Having curiosity about people, that's how I, why I love being a behaviorist. I don't assess, there is no better or worse, right or wrong in the sense of human beings, in the sense of you just seek to understand, because everyone has a reason why they're doing a certain behavior they have. And if you just understand also that they think they're doing what's in their best interests, understand why. Why do they think that's in their best interest? Again, non-judgmental curiosity will start helping you get over that ego that you have, which makes you feel slighted, makes you feel like they treated you poorly. Or no. They're just being who they are. What did you do to cause that behavior to be focused on you? And basically it comes down to, you're not supporting them in terms of their priorities in some way to register that behavior.
It's just like in the story of the rage driver in your book, that at the end of that, when you finally met and then you took the windows down, he had a daughter on the back seat. And his whole behavior was fueled because of that. And if you miss that opportunity, if you miss the understanding that his whole emotional state and then complete overreaction is not aimed at you personally as at Robin, because I got beef with you, is really tied into this small moment of mistake that you've done, but it's tied to his daughter in the backseat, right?
Right. I call it, part of that is what I call never arguing context with someone else, because everyone's context is their own. And if someone gets so emotionally hijacked and full of the negative emotions because of their particular context, if it costs me nothing to validate, in other words, understand it without arguing it, give it to them. Because human beings have this incessant need to correct others, incessant need to be right, incessant need to give you your opinion. Get over it. No one wants it. I mean, and that, now it takes muscle memory. It takes time to start building that up. But what happens is, the first time you allow someone to have their point of view, even though it might differ from yours, without arguing it, instead seek to understand it, you're going to see an amazing result from the interaction you have with that human being. They're going to want to be allied with you. They're going to want to partner with you. They're going to want to be led by you potentially. So those situations will start self-actualizing for yourself when you have those positive responses to being able to suspend your need to be right.
Yeah, I love that point. And when I was reading about the ego suspension, and then one of another technique that really resonated with me, because I worked for a leader who was doing exactly what you said, and that was get other people to come up with the idea that are yours in the first place anyway.
Right.
So rather than just saying, hey, this is what I need you to do, this is what I know is going to work, and this is how we're going to execute it, you get through the conversation that other will come up with certain ideas and suggestions, and that's how you build that trust with them.
Yeah, I call it discovery questions. Because, I often say I don't teach, mentor, or guide anyone. All I do is help you find the path that you want to walk down. And so what I do is a lot of times people aren't really thinking beyond the cause and effect of the right now. And so as I see people kind of circling around and kind of spun up and emotionally hijacked and full of stress and resentment or whatever the emotion is in the moment, all I ask is to help them discover is like, help me understand what is it you're trying to achieve? And so it slows them down. It has them re-engage their brain, and they think for a second and say, well, what I'm trying to do is this, and trying to get this priority done and trying to take care of this. And then all they do next is, all right, so help me understand, is what you're doing here helping or hindering you achieving that? They'll think of whether it is or not. And then I say, well, what other things might you be able to do? what other people could you include in this? What other relationships could you leverage in order to achieve the things you're trying to do? Because everything in life comes down to relationships. You know, I put a quote out a couple of days ago that I read that I absolutely loved, and that is, nothing on earth of value has ever been achieved without relationships and without partnerships. And so, you know, that's the question I always ask is, when you're faced with a challenge, all I ask is, who else can be part of this that you could actually leverage a relationship to move this forward to what it is you're trying to achieve? And if you don't have relationships with those people yet, identify relationships that you might need, and how can you actually strengthen those relationships to actually make them part of the team? How do you inspire them to want to be part of your little tribe? Those are the questions I love asking.
Very powerful one. And the first thing that I thought, we again have to go back to our own ego, because a lot of employees, a lot of managers wouldn't ask for help, wouldn't ask for advice, because I don't want them to see me being weak. A few times I've heard literally saying, like, if I do this, people will think I'm weak, people think of me less in a short, and that's how we would, I'm guessing, raise. And this misconception is that the manager is the one who has the answers and knows the best. So if you go and asking for questions and for help, you're like, I'm not, because I'm not as credible. It's the story that we are telling ourselves, I believe. So again, going back to that ego and first challenging it, and then it's a lot more comfortable and go and ask with us for that support with others.
And the science behind this is extremely solid. There is not one person that has all the answers. No one is perfect. And if you pretend you are and that you do, you will lose all credibility immediately. You know, the leaders that engender the greatest trust and have the greatest circles of trust are those that actually have transparency and demonstrate vulnerability. You know, because when people are transparent with each other, it allows them to know that nothing's being hidden. And when nothing's being hidden, I have all the information I need and have situational awareness to make choices and decisions to move forward. And when you actually have a team that feels safe enough and trusts enough to be able to share their own vulnerabilities, that actually makes an extremely cohesive group that actually can, you know, innovate their way through anything. You know, again, that is, you know, large companies fail a lot of times because they've moved beyond, you know, the scarcity that they had when they're small companies, and they had to innovate through challenges because they had a circle of trust, and they're able to grow because they had that trust that they could be vulnerable, they could share their insecurities, they could share their strengths as well, and they started understanding how to leverage them together. Everyone knows who's in charge. You know, you don't have to throw it up there because no one cares about your title and position. They just care about how you treat them.
It is quite clear where we're standing in here, and when we would all hide, it doesn't mean that you have to keep on reminding that you are who you are. And I'm guessing it comes back to what you've mentioned earlier. The ego is when we are insecure in what we are doing, and we have to remind everyone else who's the boss. And sort of from my experience, and I like how in your book you're really paying attention to small details. But from my experience in terms of the feedback, that ego and the authority often comes in when we're sharing feedback and we're communicating in a way that, hey, can you do this for me? I need you to do that. I don't want to see that happening again. It's all about what I want, what I don't need, versus what's the right thing to do. And this is, you know, what we're going to do together. So I'm guessing there's lots of small things that we have to really look into our language to improve.
Sure. And those things are fine to do. I mean, there are times when leaders need to be able to, you know, poke people and you know, prod them to do things. But the onus on the leader as well as the follower is to understand the why. Because, you know, if a leader is not exactly at the top, but they're somewhere in the middle, if they're telling people to do things without understanding the why that they can communicate is exactly how that action is moving the objective of all of us to get, you know, forward together. That's the onus is on that leader to figure that out, because if they can't articulate it, there's not going to be, no one's going to be vested in the action that they're being asked to take. And likewise, if they're at the very top and there's things falling off the plate, or they're, you know, there's discontent underneath them, that leader is doing a horrible job of explaining the why. You know, it's very important for everyone up and down the chain to understand what the purpose of actions are, so they can actually be vested and put their whole energy into moving forward those things. And it's not just, you know, for some random thing, or it's a waste of time. Remember, every individual makes or asks people to do things that are actually in furtherance of what they think is the best interest of a company, of an organization or group. You know, so if you understand what that why is, you can articulate it, and then you start continuing to build that leadership credibility and that leadership reservoir. So in times when you might have to give someone a poke, you have trust there already that can withstand it, and then you go backtrack it again and then keep explaining the why.
Totally agree. It has to be very clear and contextualized. What's the reason that we're doing? And it doesn't scream because I said so. It has to be tied up to higher purpose, blended with someone else's needs, as you mentioned earlier, on what's important to them. And then you can shift the language and really connect in the way that it needs to be. If it's on one-on-one, if it's on the group level, then you're reaching for a higher purpose and a bit more collectively, but it shouldn't be because I said so, because this is our job to do so. Like, this is one of the things that you hear is because it's your job to do so, because it's my job to do so. I don't think it's good enough reason in the long run to follow and to build that trustworthy relationship between one and another.
It won't. It'll, again, you can do it if you want, but it'll fail. Over time, you only have so much, cash in that leadership reservoir, and every time you give a statement like that, you take away from that cash. And once that cash is empty, you're done. The organization's done. The leader's done. It'll never be made up again. So you got to keep building that up through having your folks understand the why, having them feel empowered, having them have situational awareness, and having, most importantly, demonstrate how you value them and they're part of the team.
You've mentioned earlier on that transparency is one of your values as well.
Yep.
And as I came across your profile, your work, and I get myself your book, I was preparing for this interview, I pondered on my own journey. As I mentioned right at the beginning, nobody really trained me how to build rapport with others, how to build trust with others. It just never was a thing. But by the time I got to realize that it's important thing to do and start paying more attention towards it, it was too late for me. I was so full of habits of making it all about me and not about other people. So I was like, gosh, where do I start? And I slowly was chipping it away. And I'm curious, what was your journey towards becoming an expert in what you are today? And I know you've started the appraisal within the army. What are the other parts of your journey, and how did you become an expert in your field?
By failing majestically along the way.
Wow.
So like many things in life, you have a lot of on-the-job training. When I first got in, Naval Academy, Marine Corps, I had these illusions of being a natural born leader. And I told you example in the Marine Corps of me learning that I'm not, and then trying to learn by observing others and mimicking behaviors and seeing what was successful with them, and realizing the impact I was having on others wasn't as successful. But it really didn't start getting honed. I mean, I got better at it over time, obviously. I mean, I got on our behavioral team. I took over the behavioral team. I recruited spies and that whole thing. But what really started helping is when, and this is part of the mantra of my company, is continually learn and continually educate. So when I was asked to go down to Quantico, Virginia and teach at the FBI Academy, these advanced skills for counterintelligence interviewing and recruiting and double agent operations, is the first time I was actually forced to sit down and take this art form that I'd learned from these amazing individuals that had this beautiful skill set of interpersonal communications, trust building, and relationship building down. And I was forced to make it a paint by number, take an art form and make it so it's repeatable. And when I was forced to actually make it linear, I actually had to think in terms of, all right, my Jedi masters that actually had this down, what exactly are they doing? In other words, a lot of times people say, well, just build rapport, then do this. And it becomes this assumed knowledge that people just know how to build rapport. Well, you make a nice comment about someone's picture or what they're wearing, then move on to trust. No, there's actually things in there that are actually taking place. Like, people aren't just charismatic. They're actually doing things that actually inspire you to want to listen to them. And it really keeps coming down to those four things. They're seeking your thoughts and opinions. They're talking in terms of what's important to you. They're validating you without judging you, and they're giving you choices. Again, I do this. I love doing this with law enforcement professionals all the time. I mean, think about this. Cops have probably one of the toughest jobs in the world. They're asked to get people to confess to crimes that it's not in their best interest to confess to. How do you do that? How do you get someone to confess? I do this with cops all the time. I said, so how many of you all actually got someone to confess to a crime? All the hands go up. I said, great. What exactly did you do? I talked to him for a while, and I said, well, let me help you out. When you sat down, did you actually seek their thoughts and opinions about what actually transpired and what happened? Yes. I said, next. Did you find out what their priorities and interests are and what's going on in their lives? And you actually started talking in terms of those priorities, whether it's a reduced sentence, whether it's not letting family members know or something like that. Yes. I said, then did you actually talk and, validate what actually happened without judging them? In other words, you figured out, you lived their life. You try to figure out exactly what transpired, what led up to this, what steps they had, where they lived, their ethnicity, their demographic, their orientation, all these things. You understood these things and you didn't judge them. I said, yes. I said, and then finally, did you empower them with choice about how to move forward? That if they confessed these things to you and shared with you, you'd be able to be an advocate for them before the judge or before the lawyers or anything else, or that they didn't have to share with you. It was completely up to them. They said, yeah, that's exactly what I did. I said, so if you got someone to confess to you and you did all these things and you're transparent and open, honest, and you made yourself an available resource for their success and prosperity, why don't you do that with everyone in your life? There's no difference. I mean, think about this. Think about the strongest relationships you have, the best friends you have in life. During your last conversation with this individual or interaction you had, how often did you seek their thoughts and opinions, talk in terms of what was important to them, validate them without judging them, and give them choices? Anecdotally, I roughly say 5 to 10, maybe 15% of the time you're doing that. Can you imagine the strength and the power of that relationship, the trust and the great partnership you might have if you did it 100% of the time? Now you do that and you throw in transparency and honesty and vulnerability in there. Now what you have is genuine, sincere relationships. Perfect.
Wow. It's true. It's interesting how we do certain things in one area of our life, but we don't necessarily translate the same thing into others and expand on it.
And we should, because human beings are human beings. Doesn't matter whether you're at work, home, or play. We're all exactly the same. We're always going to act in our own best interests in terms of safety, security, and prosperity. All I have to do is figure out what you think that is, offer you resources, and we're going to have a relationship.
Powerful. When you talk to police officers about what they've done, and they kind of like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I've done. When I was reading your book, there was one segment about managing expectations, and I thought, this is a very interesting one, because one thing that I realized, and not to do the depth that you're doing and explaining, is I always say that two types of drivers that approaching traffic lights. One that has expectation that there's always going to be a green light and get upset and nervous when it's not, and their whole day is ruined and they stressed. And the other one understands it's just pure RNG. The expectation is it's a luck. It is what it is. I'll accept whether it's a green or red, and I move on. And they're just like not being impacted by that. The difference is genuinely set that expectation ahead of that. And it's just, wow, your day is a lot better if you don't expect every traffic light to be green for you.
Yeah, that's a great example. Just one of many of managing expectations to me is understanding that I can only control me. And the only thing I can really control me about is how I view the world. You can't control the tempo of anyone else. You can't control a stoplight. You can't control what other people think. You can't control what they're going to do. You can't control how they're going to react. You can't control anything. And that's why that third anchor of mine, available resource, meaning I make myself available. I do not inflict myself on your life if you do not want me. for your success and prosperity, as you define it. And the key here is no expectation of reciprocity. That's where I manage my expectations. The greatest leaders are the servants of others. They are there to be a resource for the success of those around them. They accomplish missions and goals, and they do that by creating a safe environment. And if you have an expectation, you're going to be always let down. So it's always about understanding what you can reasonably expect another person to do, and that is act in their best interest. And you just need to be flexible with understanding what that is, what their tempo is. And if they don't want you in their life, all right, it's their choice. I'm out.
Very, very interesting one, because it's not how we think and behave as a managers and how we've been trained to do so. Now, what expectations is, it's even in your appraisal form when you sit down, is have you met the expectations? Have you exceeded them? And all expectations are set so strictly and formally, and it's just, we're just going to manage what's on the paper, what we spoke about last time. And there is very little you in that conversation.
Yeah, and what's really great about that, I love working through evaluation forms and things like that, because now those are expectations. Because they become conditions of your employment.
Mhm.
In order to have a great conversation, it needs to be focused on their behavior in relations to those conditions. And again, you being a resource for them moving forward, if they're falling short on that. First, when people are first hired or brought on board or come into a new section, they have to have very, very clear understanding of what the expectations of the condition of their employment is. Because
Mhm.
all I'm going to now be as your leader is a resource for you being successful in all these areas. And if you fall short in one of those areas, we'll have a conversation about where you're falling short, what the cause and effect of that impact is, what can I do to help you overcome that, and if you no longer feel this is compatible with you being here, how can I help you move on to something else?
Mm.
Again, no tough conversations, just literally a conversation about you and your behavior and what we can do to help you move, be part of this team. And if you don't want to be part of the team because you don't like the conditions, all right, how can I help you move on? Again, I'm a resource for your success. And if your success is not overlapping here anymore, we'll find it somewhere else.
Yes, it sounds it does sound quite straightforward, but it is quite challenging at the same time. And I'm guessing there's a process to it when you get comfortable with it.
Well, and see what the greatest thing is though, at any point during that entire thing I just said, did I ever say what I thought of you? Did I ever give you a subjective opinion of you? No, we literally just talked about you, your behavior, and what it is you're trying to accomplish, and how can I be a resource for you? I am just here to say, here's what the condition of the employment is. Here's what you're very clear on. Now, granted, you can't jump in if someone's fallen short, having never had that conversation to begin with. People have to have clarity. And again, now when they understand the condition of the employment and the why those behaviors serve the priorities of the company or the goal or the team, now there's that now, and we have transparency, we have openness, we have, this is how it all flows together. This is what healthy organizations do. Now, here's what's also good is that as a leader, I've baselined and understood what your normal behavior is. And so in normal situations, you can go through 3, 4, 5, 6 evaluations and things are maintaining status quo, maybe hopefully slowly increasing in abilities in all these areas. And all of a sudden you have one that goes completely sideways. And there's it's because now something there is a pain point in this person's life. As a leader, your job is to figure out what that pain point is and see what you can do to be a resource for them overcoming it, because you do have this observed pattern of good positive behaviors that have transpired. And it's leaders that ignore their people and don't create this environment of communication, and transparency that will always, create unhealthy angst, and because they'll only pay attention when things go sideways, and they don't pay attention when things are going well as well.
Totally agree. And so if I have a conversation with someone, and this is my understanding from your book, and really trying to imagine how, when I was let's just put it that way, when I was going through the examples that you shared in your book, what I've seen is a pattern of behaviors and the different techniques that you mix and match and put in place to make sure it all comes to the result, that you build that trust, build that rapport, and you have this conversation. And you already mentioned just a second ago that you haven't judged me, you haven't talked about me, it's just about the behaviors. So what would be the language that managers should use when they're starting having those conversations, so it's less threatening and I'm making it more about trying to understand you and I'm here being your resource, versus this is not what you've done, this is you can't do that, you haven't done this, and you're falling short here. What would be the examples of certain, sentences of opening lines that we could use to build a little bit more trust from the get-go?
Yeah, so this is why I'm a big believer in discover everyone's greatness every single day. So so human beings are really good at confirmation bias. And whether it's positive or negative, some people are naturally positive, so they're always going to see the good things in others. And some people can be very negative, and they're always going to look for your negatives. Here's another guarantee of all human beings, besides acting in our own best interest in terms of safety, security, and prosperity. We're all insecure about something as well, which means we all aren't good at something. And so stop paying attention to that, because it's universal, and look for the greatness. In other words, everyone has something they're really good at, either professional, personal, something. Find those things. That way, when you do have to potentially have a more challenging conversation, the reason conversations can come across as challenging and why people get defensive is because the way you might be starting them is saying to them, stand by, I'm about to throw you out of the tribe. Because again, our ancient tribal brains or genetics and biology says that we want to belong to meaningful groups and organizations and be valued by them because it means it's our survival. You know, when we feel we're part of a tribe and part of a collective and we have good, healthy relationships, you know, the oxytocin is flowing in the brain. It's the long-term drugs that say this is good for us to be here. And when you as a leader start out that conversation by, hey, come here, we need to go have a talk. All of a sudden, defensiveness comes up. I'm about to be thrown out of the tribe. And when I get defensive, I start rationalizing. I start projecting blame. I start doing all the negative behaviors, which makes it a lot of times worse. And it's all because you as a leader started off by saying, stand by, I'm going to kick you out of the tribe. As opposed to you start the conversation with what I call as a specific non-judgmental validation of a strength, attribute, or action. In other words, in order to have one of those great validation statements, you have to have paid attention to their strengths. And so instead of saying, hey, we need to go have a talk, you say, hey, last week when I saw you do this project over here like this, the result was pretty remarkable because here's what I saw you do. Here's what the result was. And it was amazing. I said, would you mind being able to share that with others? Because I think we could all really benefit from that. By the way, something seems a little off lately. Are you dealing with any kind of challenges that, you know, I might be able to be a resource for, or what's going on? The likelihood of them sharing, you know, that something might be a little off is much higher because I just said, hey, tribe is good. You're part of the tribe. I value you. What's going on? Because there's a behavior change. You know, I see a deviation from your standard behavior. In other words, there's a pain point in there. Can I be a resource for you in any way, or do you need to work it out on your own? There you go.
Or the other way could be linking the behavior that we're trying to challenge, where the person is not performing at, link it with the past great performance in that area, and then link it. So in the past, I remember this is how you deliver. This is what it was. It's exceptional, and now it's slightly deteriorates, and your performance is not
at
the same level, and the principle will be the same.
Yeah, my last book, Sizing People Up, I have 6 signs for behavior prediction, and one of the signs is called actions. And that's basically past patterns of key behaviors. If I observe you doing something the same way 2, 3, or 4 times, the likelihood of you doing it 5, 6, 7 times the same way, it's extremely high. Now, if you don't, that's because another priority, another input has come in to deviate your behavior. So my job as a leader is to figure out, all right, what impact happened that actually changed your behavior. And again, you don't judge it because this person is actually acting in what they think is their best interest. But now you're giving them an optic about how this might not be in their best interest because something else has happened. What can I do as a leader to help mitigate those things in your life?
To put it in a very simple concept, if somebody is on time 20 times over the last 6 months and recently been slightly late several times, there has to be a reason.
Yes.
And more likely than not, managers are focusing just on the fact that you haven't been on time recently, and we have to address that. And it creates a bit of a challenge because it links to often one of the tips that I heard from you, and it was like, this is great that you're talking about it, is that managers often tend to share the feedback through always and nevers. You talked about one in your video, so there is chances that some managers are literally saying, hey, you're never on time, or you're always late. No, I'm not always late. I'm recently, right? How about my last 5 months when I've never been late, right? And so the way I've seen it and how I label it and explain it with my feedback workshop is, as soon as you say, hey, you're never on time, or you're always late, or why you never take the garbage out, why I always have to do it myself, is what I'm now focused on is on you, on the fact that you're not being fair with me. What's your intention here? Because literally what you're saying is a lie. I know it's a habit how we communicate, but it's a lie. It's not never, and it's not always.
Right. Absolutely. And you used a great word in there also. You used what? Instead of asking the why questions, like, why are you late? Why are you always late? No, say what? Ask what questions? What is going on to cause you to be late on the days that you are being late? What kind of things can you do to mitigate those things? What kind of things can I do to help you mitigate those things? What kind of things can I do, to give you maybe a flexible work schedule if you need it on those particular days for those particular things? So asking what questions is generally a lot more productive than asking the why questions.
Certainly is. The why in any language used is very interrogatory. It's like, it feels like somebody's questioning me, questioning my intention, questioning me. Where do I belong in this tribe? Like you've mentioned earlier on.
Yeah, and then you go less down the road of being able to take correction and actions, and you're just going to the emotion of it. with why questions. What questions, I'm not discounting them, but what questions really focus on the exact actions, because actions, it's easier to have a cause and effect of understand actions without judging them than it is to deal with emotions, because then people start invalidating your emotions and you shouldn't feel that way. I mean, it just goes nowhere. It just spins around in circles.
There is also one thing that jumped out to me as I was reading your book, and it's just it's my understanding of it. It seems like every time you say a story, how you strike up conversation with someone, whether it's the gentleman in the restaurant that you finish your salad and put it on the side,
right,
or whether it's sitting on the wall with a lady that you spoke in the bar. It seems like you're setting up the stage before you even say something. And I was wondering, as I was reading it, is there something that we as managers can do to use the same principle and the reasons? First of all, what are the reasons, and what can we do as managers also to set the stage a little bit more better, so when we have those difficult conversations, it's easier?
I think it's, you can set the stage a number of ways. I mean, the examples you're given are kind of doing two things. You're demonstrating that at standby, I'm about to really focus on you rather than any other distractions, which is always very important. Put cell phones down, turn cell phones off, make a rule of no cell phones in offices or at conference rooms. The other thing too is establishing a time constraint, which is the first step, I think, because when people understand that there's going to be an end in sight, their defenses are generally lower, and also that they feel they're more in control as well, because people, again, Robert Cialdini's book, Influence, human beings, safety, security, prosperity, and a sense of control, and establishing a time constraint and allow other people to control the time, or at least seeking their thoughts and opinions about how much time they have, is also a very good way to set that stage.
So in other words, rather than saying, hey, let's just have a conversation, just have a quick coffee, just set a certain time frame as well from the get-go.
Quick coffee, or do you want to get together maybe 2 cups of coffee over the next month, and say, and limit the time on the coffee too. Say, how about we do 30 minutes for coffee, or 15, 10. I mean, who hasn't gone to a lecture somewhere where you never knew how long each speaker was going to be, and they went for an hour or 2 hours, and then all of a sudden you get a guy that comes up there and you see on the schedule is going to be an hour. Now he gets up in front of you and says, all right, I'm on a schedule to be here for an hour. I had 45 slides, but I'll tell you what, it's been a long day. 15 minutes, 5 slides. Everyone in? And everyone's like, yes. So whether it was originally 15 minutes or not, the fact that he's accommodating you, he's showing a time constraint, making that about you and not about him, that kind of goes to a mantra I learned when I was teaching at the FBI Academy that I thought was really good, and that is, give them what they want, not what you want to give them, because and that is focusing then on what people's needs are rather than what you think their needs are. So there you go.
Super important. Right. There is one question, Robin, that I always ask my guests towards the end of the interview, and that is, who is the best coach-like leader that you worked for in your career, during your career?
Boy, I had a lot. As I've reflected on my life too, there's ones there that I didn't even know were there. I mean, without a few people, without this one guy, when I was in high school, the school resource officer, I probably would have never gotten in the Naval Academy. He inserted himself in my life. My football coach helped me overcome, insecurities. There's great Marines. Probably one that's always stands. So Joe Navarro, I got great FBI agents that were teachers, mentors, and guides. Probably the one that told me this great statement, though, is he always stands out. He was a colonel I worked for when I was at Paris Island as a company commander, and he said, never tell me no, only tell me yes. Just tell me what it'll cost me. And so he taught me how to empower him with choice with the cost-benefit analysis of everything. In other words, in that one statement, he said, talk in terms of my priorities, give me a cost-benefit analysis, and give me choices. And my job was to make his job easier by giving him choices. And now the cool thing was I going to give him choices that weren't also good for me as well? No. And so I just thought that was good. But boy, I've had a lot. I mean, because again, we were all students of everyone. We're all teachers of others. So my list is long.
Awesome. That's I'm a bit jealous now. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Something that you said right at the beginning really resonated with me, like at a deep level. And you said we have the responsibility to share our knowledge and wisdom. And the way I always talk about feedback, it's not my job as a manager to share the feedback. I have moral responsibility and duty to share something that will help you overcome your challenges, because I see you struggling and facing adversity, and I have a piece of information that is going to help you. And why would I withhold it? It's not my job to do it, or because you're not in my team, it's not my job to do it. It's my moral responsibility as a human being to share my expertise, my knowledge, to help others around, I believe, as well. So that really, really resonated with me.
Yep. My good friend, teacher, mentor, and guide, Joe Navarro, he wrote the book, What Everybody is Saying. He hounded me for years to write my first book, because he said, if you have at least one piece of information another human being could benefit from, shame on you for not getting it to them. And so, yeah, and that's why, that's why I have a book study. I mean, I've written 3 books, but I'm a constant consumer of others, because, everyone's got something to offer. I will find the greatness in everything I read, because I discovered during COVID, where I'm listening to books on Audible nonstop, is that there's not enough years in my life left to read and learn all that I wish I could, because so many people have so much to share.
Yeah, I noticed on your content that you're sharing now a breakdown of the books. Leaders Eat Last is one of them. Another one was something with the marketing as well, empathy.
Hook Point. Hook Point by Brendan Kane. Matter of fact, I just did an interview of him. It'll be out in a couple of days.
Wow.
Yeah, great. So the thing I loved about that book too, I picked books that really resonate with me when it comes to understanding, building relationships. And so here's this, hook point, creating a hook point, that gets people to, to go to your content and want your content, which is all about marketing. But his message is very clear. And this is exactly the same. He goes, discover the pain. The hook point is very simple. Discover the pain point of others and provide a unique resource and solution to that for others. It's all about understanding others and being a resource for them. And that's it. That's what I love about it.
I'm going to grab the book as well, because
good.
I like to explore different avenues in order to improve feedback methodology. You mentioned Robert Cialdini as well. I think there's a lot we can learn from marketing folks in order to influence people and understanding human behaviors, because as you mentioned, we're all humans at the end of the day, and we work in the same capacity, right? So very quick question. Is there a 4th book coming? Because I know you've got 3 ones, Sizing People Up, The Code of Trust, and it's not all about me. Is there a 4th one coming then?
Not soon.
But there's idea percolating, yeah?
Well, the next one would be on mentoring and coaching. It's kind of each one of my books is a natural evolution to where I currently am at, because life is a progression, not a journey. So the first one was on rapport, and because that's the starting point. And from rapport, I noticed, well, once you have rapport, you have trust. And from trust, because those 2 books focus so heartily on understanding others, that I really started believing and seeing that once you understand others at such a deep level, you can reasonably predict what they're going to do. And that's where Sizing People Up came from. And so, which in all 3 of them focus really 100% on creating that good, healthy relationship. And so part of that now is realizing that, how do you teach that and pass it on to others? So there's where mentoring and coaching comes up next. So we'll see.
I love that one. I'm going to grab the Sizing People Up, because it sounds like a very, very interesting one for sure. So I know you've got your website, People's Formula. I've connected with you on LinkedIn. I think you also have a Twitter. Is there anywhere else we can learn from you and about you?
Sure. Yeah. So the easiest is, like you said, is go to peopleformula.com, all one website. And I'm on social media. I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. But all those things do get funneled into the website. Oh, and also have a YouTube channel where I do my interviews on the authors that were willing to share with me as well. So yeah, there's lots of content. However you want to scale it, from free resources all the way up to you can purchase my online training academy, which is on my website.
Absolutely, guys. I would highly recommend to check out Robin's content, connect with him and learn from him, more importantly, because those skill sets are incredibly important in our lives. So guys, thank you very much for tuning in, and Robin, thank you so much for being today with me.
Thank you, Raf, for having me on board. I hope everyone have a great day.